Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to, well, really getting informed. We take a whole stack of sources, dig through them, and pull out the nuggets you need to know. Today, we're diving into something that honestly often feels like it's straight out of a movie script, but our sources, they show it's a very real and actually escalating concern. We're talking about global catastrophes, specifically the really chilling idea of nuclear winter. It's about looking at what happens when something you thought was, unthinkable suddenly feels very present. And you've given us a fascinating stack here. Really makes you stop and think. Some sobering facts, but also some surprising angles. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission, as always, is to give you the vital knowledge, help you navigate these complex threats without getting totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, isn't just the individual facts, but how these sources connect the dots. You see the links between the risks we face right now, geopolitically, and these long-term survival strategies for humanity. We're not just looking at what the threats are, we're digging into why they matter so much right now. And, crucially, what realistic things could actually be done. It's about being informed, right? Building resilience.
Absolutely. And the thing that just jumps out immediately right at the start of this deep dive, it's a really stark concern from the sources, this idea that our own children might genuinely face a nuclear war. And it's not just presented as like a possibility. The material suggests the threat could be greater now than during the Cold War peak. Now, my first reaction, surprise. You always hear about how the number of warheads went down, right? So what's the data? What explains this feeling that the risk is actually higher? Does that initial surprise resonate with you?
It does. It's a really crucial point. And it feels counterintuitive, like you said. If you look at the sheer numbers, yeah, the Cold War peak was maybe 70,000 warheads globally.
Huh.
Staggering. Today, it's way lower, maybe around 12,000 total. So you'd think, okay, less risk. But the insight from the sources is that the nature of the threat has shifted. It's not just about the total count. The active usable warheads. Still substantial. You've got Russia and the U.S. with around 4,000 each. China's arsenal is growing, maybe 600 now.
Yeah.
Then France, UK, India, Pakistan.
Yeah.
They all have them. What's really concerning, though, isn't just the numbers. It's the erosion of deterrence norms, the rhetoric.
So it's less about the hardware, the bombs themselves,
Exactly.
and more about the software, the global politics, the willingness, maybe.
Precisely. The political climate, this perceived dip in global stability, it just ramps up the risk perception. And there's a powerful symbol for this, the Doomsday Clock, the one from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. It represents how close we are to global catastrophe. Right now it's set at 89 seconds to midnight. That's the closest it has ever been in its, 77-year history?
89 seconds. Wow.
Yeah. And that setting isn't just about warhead numbers. It's a whole assessment of all the existential threats. But nuclear risk is right at the heart of it. It basically underscores that even with smaller arsenals, the conditions that could lead to their use, they feel much more precarious today.
89 seconds. That is chilling. But here's what really struck me in the sources, this kind of weird paradox. You have world leaders, almost casually mentioning nuclear options in public.
Yeah.
Yet for so many of us, the threat feels distant,
Yeah.
dull, like something from a history lesson, not a current event. Why do you think that disconnect exists, this public complacency?
That's a really insightful observation. And it is a critical disconnect, isn't it, between the reality and the public feeling. Sources point to a few things. Maybe decades without a major nuclear exchange makes people think it won't happen. There's also just the sheer horror of it all. It can be psychologically overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
So maybe people tune it out, a kind of denial. And let's be honest, the daily grind. Immediate worries like bills or local news, they can easily overshadow this huge, abstract future threat. But zooming out, what it means is that the system's meant to stop this diplomacy. Treaties, they're under serious strain. And that public complacency, it could actually become a risk factor itself, by not putting pressure on leaders for urgent action.
That makes a lot of sense, like the frog in the boiling water, kind of.
Yeah, something like that.
The threat creeps up slowly so we don't fully react.
Okay, let's pivot. From the why of the risk to the what if.
Yeah.
If the unthinkable does happen, the sources paint this absolutely terrifying picture. It goes way beyond the initial blasts. So after the immediate horrific destruction, what are the big long-term effects, the things that would truly change the planet?
Right. The immediate hit is catastrophic. Tens, maybe hundreds of millions dead right away. But the real unfolding horror, as you say, comes after. The sources talk about cities getting hit, triggering firestorms. And these aren't just, big fires. They're massive self-sustaining infernos, like fiery tornadoes, creating their own super hot weather systems. They basically act like giant chimneys.
Chimneys.
Yeah, sucking up debris, soot, smoke, miles high into the upper
So
atmosphere.
it's not just smoke, it's like pulverized cities going way up high. Yeah, exactly that. And this massive cloud of ash and soot gets pulled into the stratosphere, creates this dense global shroud, blocks out the sun, and that plunges the Earth into what scientists call nuclear winter. Depending on how big the conflict is, even a so-called small regional war, global temperatures could drop. We're talking a staggering 5 to 20 degrees Celsius.
5 to 20 degrees globally.
Globally. And it's not quick. This could last for 5, maybe 10 years. Imagine that kind of climate shift.
Yeah.
What it does to ecosystems, to, well, everything.
A 20-degree drop for a decade. That's beyond anything in recorded history. It sounds like Ice Age conditions or worse. It actually reminds me of something else mentioned in the sources, supervolcanoes. Apparently, Earth has about a dozen of these things, capable of throwing out like 1,000 cubic kilometers of stuff. Yellowstone is the big example, right?
Okay.
Erupted a few times, covered huge parts of the U.S. in ash. What's the key thing we learned from comparing nuclear winter and a supervolcano?
Yeah, the comparison is really useful because both scenarios involve this massive global cooling, this atmospheric disruption, similar long-term effects. But the key difference, the sources point out, it's actually profound and pretty chilling. Unlike a nuclear war, we can't prevent a supervolcano eruption. We can only endure it. There's no don't erupt button for Yellowstone, right?
Right.
So the insight is, while we face these huge, uncontrollable natural forces, we also have the power to cause a catastrophe on a similar scale ourselves, maybe even worse. It really forces you to confront our unique responsibility here, preventing a human-made winter.
That is a crucial distinction. Human agency and one, not the other. But, for a while, wasn't there a debate? Some people thought nuclear winter wasn't quite so severe. I sort of remember hearing about a nuclear autumn idea, maybe milder cooling.
Yeah.
What changed? How did we get from autumn back to this winter consensus?
That's a great question. It really shows how the science, the modeling has evolved. You're right, back in the 90s, there were some studies, kind of skeptical ones, proposing this nuclear autumn, milder effects. But our sources are pretty clear. Newer research, using much more sophisticated climate models, have basically overtaken those older findings. They're now seen as outliers. The scientific consensus today, it firmly backs devastating long-term effects. The big shift came from understanding how the soot from firestorms behaves. It gets injected really high into the stratosphere. And up there, it just persists for years. It doesn't wash out quickly like lower atmosphere smoke. It acts like this persistent reflective blanket.
So it wasn't just tweaking the numbers. It was a fundamental rethink of where the smoke goes and how long it stays there.
Precisely. And that updated understanding, it leads to much, much grimmer projections, especially for agriculture. Think about our staple crops, wheat, corn, rice. They're incredibly vulnerable to sudden, long periods of cold and, crucially, lack of sunlight. There was a study in 2020, for instance, estimated that even a regional nuclear war, say between India and Pakistan, could indirectly kill 2.5 billion people just through famine. And a full-scale U.S.-Russia exchange. That same study put the number at 5 billion. 5 billion people indirectly from starvation.
5 billion, that number it's almost impossible to really grasp. Nearly 2/3 of everyone on Earth. But wait, the sources suggest it gets even worse than that. How can it possibly be worse than 5 billion dead from famine?
Yeah, that's the really humbling, sobering part. A more recent study from Penn State found that even the 2020 estimate, probably too optimistic.
Optimistic.
Because it hadn't fully accounted for other compounding factors. Specifically, all that soot and chemicals shot into the stratosphere. It wouldn't just block sunlight. It would chemically shred the ozone layer, our protection.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So you'd get significantly more harmful UV radiation hitting the surface, even through the gloom, which would further damage crops, harm all living things. So the revised projection, global crop yields might plummet by an unbelievable 80% or more.
80% drop in food.
Which means the starvation toll would be even more catastrophic than the 5 billion estimate.
Yeah.
So if you zoom out, the real insight from that Penn State study isn't just a higher number. It's the realization that our complex models of Earth's systems, they seem to consistently underestimate these cascading failures. Every time scientists dig deeper, they find new ways things could amplify, get worse. It suggests we might have a blind spot for the true worst case. The indirect deaths could be far, far higher.
That's genuinely terrifying. That our best science struggles to capture the full picture because everything is so interconnected and fragile. Like every time we think we found the bottom, there's another level down. So, okay. Given
Bummer.
all these grim facts, what can we actually do? Is there anything? Or are we just supposed to, sit tight and watch the doomsday clock tick closer to midnight?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? And the sources do pivot to that urgently. The absolute number one thing, the primary prevention. It's simple, but critical. If you have nuclear codes, don't use them. That's for the leaders. For the rest of us, without launch codes, scientists are looking hard at proactive survival strategies, especially around food. The big emphasis is on preparing to shift agriculture towards cold-resistant crops. Resilient stuff. We're talking potatoes, incredibly calorie-dense, hardy. Even kale, things that can handle cold, low light better.
Potatoes and kale. I can just picture the global menu change. Although I think one source had the speaker joking about whether kale even counts as food.
Small chuckle. Yeah, maybe post-apocalyptic cuisine won't be winning any awards. But the serious point is, these are practical, resilient options. And beyond those crops, the sources identify seaweed as maybe the most promising food source in that kind of scenario.
Seaweed? Really?
Yeah, it's fast-growing, it's incredibly scalable, doesn't need fresh water or fertilizer or land, and it's pretty resilient to changes in light and temperature. You can imagine huge ocean farms.
Seaweed as a global staple, that's actually fascinating. A really surprising insight. But it makes sense when you list the properties. Okay, so we've got potatoes, kale, seaweed. Are we actually ready to, make that switch if we had to?
And that's the massive challenge right there. Humanity is just not currently set up to make that kind of shift, not at the scale needed. Thinking about globally changing our entire food system is not just a science problem. It's economic, logistical, deeply cultural even. Imagine the infrastructure you'd need, new global food chains, teaching billions about new diets, overcoming food habits, managing all that in a potentially broken world. The societal hurdles are almost as scary as the initial event. So it really raises the question, are we ready for that kind of food system pivot? The infrastructure just isn't there.
Yeah.
And that lack of readiness, that's another risk factor itself.
Right. And that really hammers home why this isn't just, hypothetical science fiction. It's about urgent preparation. It's exactly like asteroid defense, isn't it? A known global threat that needs proactive awareness, collective action before it happens. We can't afford complacency. The challenge then becomes, how do we start building that resilience? How do we foster that collective action now?
Exactly. The scale of coordination needed is huge. But the sources also offer a reminder, maybe, that even smaller collective actions can be powerful models. There's this compelling example of community-driven work from an organization called Planet Wild. They're an environmental group funding ecosystem restoration. What's interesting isn't just, say, their success cleaning up a polluted river, but how their model works. It shows that even facing overwhelming global problems, focused, transparent community action can make a real difference.
That's a great point. It's about empowering people, right? Making them feel like they can contribute, even when the problems seem impossibly big. I thought their project, cleaning that European river using a repurposed weed harvester boat, was pretty cool. Shows ingenuity, direct results.
Absolutely. The insight from Planet Wild, for our discussion, isn't really about promoting them specifically. It's about understanding the power of that model, being transparent, linking donations directly to impact, building shared responsibility. It highlights that human agency working together can tackle huge environmental challenges, and that offers maybe a glimmer of hope that similar collaborative efforts could, theoretically, address these even bigger existential threats we've been talking about.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening right now? Today, we've really dug into the seriousness of nuclear risks, explored the terrifying potential of nuclear winter. We've seen how both natural disasters like supervolcanoes and human conflicts could trigger global catastrophe. And we've highlighted this critical need for both prevention, don't use the codes, and for proactive survival strategies for all of us.
Yeah, just to hammer home the key takeaways. We are still dangerously close to nuclear conflict. Not just numbers, but the whole geopolitical situation, and maybe our own complacency. Both nuclear winter and supervolcanoes could cause global crop failure, mass starvation, and the latest science suggests it would likely be much worse than we thought. Billions dead. That's a humbling lesson about our models. But proactive preparation, resilient crops, things like seaweed, fostering collective action, it's essential. Knowledge is only really valuable when you understand it and apply it, right? And these sources scream that we need informed, engaged action now.
That really brings it all home. So, given everything we've talked about today, the huge threats, the surprising ways we're vulnerable, but also that glimmer of hope through proactive steps, here's a final thought. What small step could you take this week just to become a little more informed or maybe engaged with these big existential risks? Because ultimately, just being aware, that itself is a form of preparation. It's a shield against complacency, maybe the first step towards a more resilient future. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.